I'm Blaze, and this channel is a space for me to discuss film stuff I find relevant and interesting, but I'll throw in the occasional not-so-film-related content as I see fit. An update from last video, the camera situation's a lot more permanent, the mic still isn't. I was having some issues with it that I figured out, but for next video it should be more permanent, and the background is still going to change in the next couple weeks. But there we go. Today we're going to be discussing Season 2 of Netflix's critically acclaimed Love, Death, Robots series. It's an anthology with a bunch of short films based around the titular themes of love, death, and robots. I'm going to start by saying that I loved Season 1. There are a few shorts that kind of missed the mark, but overall they tied it all together really nicely, and most of them I enjoyed. So now I was really excited for Season 2 because I'd heard that Netflix had taken notes on what people didn't like about Season 1, namely the mistreatment of the female characters, and had improved it for Season 2, and so I was really excited going into this, but I was pretty disappointed overall. It wasn't a bad series, and it definitely holds up as a second installation, but I feel like there's a lot of areas that this series could have improved in, and so I'm going to go into that into this video. Originally I was planning on ranking all the episodes, but after watching them I kind of figured that ranking them against each other wasn't the best way to go about this, and so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving them a score out of 20. 5 points for love, 5 points for death, 5 points for robots, and 5 points for my subjective opinion, so that's a total of 20. And then from there we can see how the episodes rank against each other and against Season 1 episodes based on these scores. I went ahead and ranked all the episodes from Season 1, and so the average score for Season 1 was a 14 out of 20. So from here on out there's going to be spoilers for Season 2. If that's something that matters to you, go ahead and watch it now. It's only about 90 minutes total since there's only 8 shorts in this season, each just over 10 minutes compared to last season's 18 shorts. Automated Customer Service is the first episode of Season 2, and it follows an old woman and her dog, little Bichon Frise, very cute, as she tries to deal with the automated customer service machine of her vacuum robot that's malfunctioning. Eventually the robot ends up going into pest control mode, where it's designed to annihilate small pests like rodents and bugs, but decides that the lady and her dog are much more suitable prey. The episode ends with the woman and her dog escaping the house, but all robots in the area are now trying to kill her, as everyone has identified her as a pest, and so she has to live the remainder of her life on the run from the robots. So now for the rankings. This short contained robots. That's a lot more than some of the other shorts in this season can say, and the robots were not only part of this short, but a really driving factor of it, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for that department. Death was heavily implied, and the threat of death played a really crucial role in the story, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for death. It didn't really have anything to say on death, and it didn't discuss death as a theme, but death was an aspect of the film. I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 5 for love because of the woman and her relationship with her dog. She clearly loves the dog to the point where she doesn't sacrifice it to the vacuum bot like the customer service representative wants her to. So now my thoughts on the short are that it was really entertaining, but it wasn't great. There were a lot of funny moments, especially when she was holding up the little dog and debating whether or not to sacrifice it. Sounds kind of morbid, but trust me, it really works in the moment. But overall, I felt like there wasn't a logical escalation of the conflict. There was no real reason, other than to drive the plot forward, that the woman became targeted as a pest by the robot. The dog makes more sense because he's a small rodent. You can kind of make the stretch that because she was protecting the dog, then the robot identified her as a pest as well, but it didn't really fit. And the escalation from the robot identifying her as a pest and prioritizing her to every robot in the world prioritizing trying to kill her didn't make sense. I can understand if every robot in the world identified her as on the list of pests, but I don't understand every robot in the world prioritizing eliminating her over the other jobs that they were shown to be in the middle of and abandoning to go get her. And another thing that doesn't really make sense is how she is considered a pest, but then the entirety of humans aren't and the rest of the humans are fine. So I find it kind of just an odd escalation of the conflict and didn't really work, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Now overall, this leaves this short with a score of 13 out of 20, which is pretty respectable. It was only one shy of the average of Season 1, which is 14 out of 20, so I'm going to give it a pass. Pretty good. Ice is the second short of this season. It follows 2 brothers, one modded, we don't know what exactly modded means, either genetic or with robotic enhancements, and one natural. The cooler younger brother, who's modded, is reluctant to take his older natural brother with him to go whale watching, quote unquote, we'll get into that more later, with his cool modded friends, but eventually does. The modded friends are really big adrenaline junkies, so what they end up doing that night is they go onto the water, it's frozen, and then frost whales come and break through the water and they run to try and not get caught by and fall in because of the frost whales. This was a really cool concept, and the frost whales are very aesthetically pleasing, but I feel like there wasn't enough plot to drive this short forward. In the love department, I'm giving it a 3 out of 5 for the relationship and love between the brothers that were depicted in the short. It wasn't really explored, and the relationship kind of healed much more quickly than I would have liked to show an actual escalation in their relationship. Of course, you do have a limited runtime with a short film, but I feel like it could have just been tweaked the way that things moved forward, and it would have been a lot stronger. I'm going to give Death a value of 2, as they could have very easily been killed by the frost whales or fallen into the cold water. Death was the stakes at play in this short, although not much really came of it. In the robots department, I'm going to give it a 3. Now, there weren't robots per se, so I'm being very lenient with this, but I'm considering robots to be sci-fi elements and how the sci-fi elements play into the story. The characters were all modified. We don't know if it's genetically or mechanical, like I said, but that really elevates the score, although to be honest, them being modded doesn't really impact the story that much. They could have just been the cool kids who didn't want to hang out with the lame older brother. Also, they are on a colony planet, but that also doesn't really play much of an impact. They could have just been in a more frozen part of Earth in the future where whales have cool colors. In fact, they could have just been normal whales and the story wouldn't have changed very much. So the sci-fi elements didn't really do anything, so I'm only giving it a 3. My subjective ranking for this short is going to be a 2, and that's only because it reminded me so much of Fish Night, one of the shorts from season 1. The frost whales are too reminiscent of the glowing animals in the sky from that short that I really didn't get anything new and exciting from them. Furthermore, this short really just felt like an excuse to animate the gorgeous frost whales. In fact, I feel like the animation was so focused on the frost whales that it really lacked in the characters' faces. It was really hard to watch sometimes just because the characters were so unappealing to the eye. Now, I'm not saying your animated characters have to be pretty or anything like that, but if you look at episode 1 of this season, the character design, it wasn't gorgeous. In fact, it was ugly, but it was done on purpose and in a meaningful way. You got a sense of the world that they were living in based on the way the characters were animated to be not super attractive. But in this short, it kind of just fell flat and like the animation wasn't super thought out. Another reason I didn't really like this short is that Sedge cracked his ankle or twisted his ankle on the ice, which is why the older brother had to rescue him and got initiated as part of the group. But in the next sequence that only takes place a couple minutes later, Sedge is walking normally and doing flips and stuff with his modded friends. So it doesn't really make sense to be an inciting incident for his brother having to step up if his injury is healed like 2 seconds later. I can understand him having fast healing from being modded, but I just don't think that the way it was done made very much sense because he should have still been limping later, or he should have had enough adrenaline to carry himself out of the moment where his life's in danger. Overall, this short scores a 10 out of 20, which isn't the best ranking, but there's definitely some worse episodes in season 1 and in this season. Next on the list is Pop Squad. I'll be honest right off the bat, this one is the only episode in this season to score a perfect 20 out of 20. The love aspect is really well explored through the love of children and parenting and that whole dynamic there. The film begs the question of, should we even raise kids? Is it worth it? Is all the heartache worth it for the joy and love that comes from that kind of relationship? And ultimately it answers with a resounding yes. Death is shown through the government agency, the Pop Squad, a group who go through the fringes of society of medically induced immortals and kill off those who produce offspring, the breeders. They kill off those breeders and their children with little regard for the human life. This is done to prevent the inevitable overpopulation of an immortal society. Why bother having kids when they're taking resources away from the adults who've lived hundreds of years and want to continue living those lives as fully educated and creative, productive members of society in order to just feed kids that'll take years to even become close to the level of productivity that comes from these adults who really want and pay to live forever. The sci-fi element is nailed on the head through the medically induced immortality. We're even shown a little bit on how this works through the blue IV drip that we see the opera singer receive in order just to keep her youth and agelessness. I love this short because the clear thematic messaging shown throughout. Not only do we see that the film answers the question that it brings up of yes, raising children is 1,000% worth it, we also see that you can't change a broken system that easily. Sure, one character, the protagonist's mind is changed by the end of the film, but he dies, his partner dies, and we're left to assume that the mother and child who changed his mind are going to die too, because eventually the government's going to find the 2 bodies fallen outside their house and investigate the house and see that there's a child living there. The film is a hopeless tragedy, but it also acts as a brilliant warning to appreciate your youth and appreciate the youth of those around you and empower them, raise them up to help them grow to be the strongest that they can be. Overall, this short is spectacular, a perfect 20 out of 20, and the kind of thing I expect from the sequel to a critically acclaimed anthology series about love, death, and robots. Snow in the Desert had really big shoes to fill coming after Pop Squad, and I feel like it tried its best, but it just didn't hit there and didn't resonate as hard, especially after the hard-hitting piece that came right before it. The short follows Snow, an immortal, with many bounties on his head, by people who want to dissect him and figure out what causes his immortality. For love, I'm going to give this short a 4, as it depicts the relationship that Snow has with his dead wife, and having to move on from that, being an immortal who's going to live forever, live way past she would, and love someone who's going to die frailly in front of him. It also depicts him moving on and growing from that relationship, finding new love with someone else. The reason that this falls short of a 5 is because I feel like even though it depicted love very well, it didn't say anything new. It didn't give us anything to think about or tell us anything new and exciting about the topic. It just used it as a tool to tell a story. Death is shown through the death of the bounty hunters who are trying to dissect Snow, and the death of his wife that he must learn to grow. But once again, this is only going to be given a 4 because I feel like they didn't have anything to say about it. They just used it as a tool to move the story forward. Now, there's nothing wrong with using something like death or love as a tool to move the story forward, but in a series called Love, Death, and Robots, I expect you to explore at least one of those 3 themes and tell me something new and interesting, or give me something to think about from those themes. This film does, however, earn a 5 in the robots department, as it's very heavily influenced by the sci-fi aspect. His love interest is a cyborg, space travel is heavily implied, there are alien species, and the story kind of revolves around the sci-fi elements of it, which is the kind of thing you need in a series like this. As for my rating, it's going to be a 3. The film was good and it had a very coherent plot, but it didn't really resonate well with me. The film didn't really have anything to say, and films don't necessarily have to have something to say, but in this anthology series, I feel like the whole point is that they have something to say about one of the 3 topics brought forward, and it didn't have anything to say about either, so it just didn't fit as well into this series as I thought it should. The only thing I come away thinking from it was, cool story, I guess, so that gives it a 16 out of 20. When I first saw the title card for The Tall Grass, I thought it would be a bit too similar to the film that came out based on Stephen King's book, In the Tall Grass, and I didn't really want to endure that baby-eating fiasco a second time. But it wasn't, which is a really high mark for something with the same title. The premise is still the same, of characters getting lost in tall grass, and the grass shifts around them, making the landscape change and making it harder to navigate themselves and find their way out. But the story that plays out is different enough that it's still watchable. Now, in this short, a train breaks down in a field of tall grass, and our protagonist takes an ill-advised smoke break to go step outside, even though it'll only take a couple minutes to repair. Stupidly, he walks into the tall grass and struggles to make his way back to the train, even after the conductor calls all aboard twice. Now, in this field of tall grass, there's these glowing blue-white zombie-like creatures who are implied to be the corpses, reanimated, of those who have died in that field. Now, this film is going to get a 1 on the love scale. Love isn't so much as mentioned, let alone explored as a key theme, but I'm going to give it a 1 because death is implied, and you can't really have death without love or a lack thereof. Death is going to be a 3, as death is the stakes of this film. Our protagonist nearly dies in the grass. Plus, we're also told that the creatures who are chasing him may or may not be those who have died before him. On the robot scale, it's going to earn a 2, as it's hinted that the creatures may have come through a portal of some kind, but it's also hinted that it may be a fantasy aspect, so I don't know. I don't really want to rank it too highly, but I'm also not going to give it a 1 or a 0, so 2 it is. Lastly, for my ranking, I'm going to give it a 3. I really like the frameworks that they laid out. The fact that the train breaks down in this field really regularly, and that the maintenance man of the train sees the people go in there regularly, is a really interesting concept. And the fact that it may even be an opening of another world, as we're told it might be, is really interesting. There are a lot of really interesting elements, but I feel like they didn't get strung together very well. The conversation that the train man has with the protagonist at the end of the film just feels like trailer bait of fake deep things that they're gonna say. Like, oh, sometimes I feel like a portal to another dimension opens up. Like, cool. But does it actually? Or does that just sound good to stick in your trailer for the film? Overall, this short scores a 9 out of 10, and I feel like it could have just used a little bit more work in the script department to make it fit more in line with the ideas that the series is trying to go for. Now, I loved the next film, All Through the House. It was a great combination of the Krampus story with the classic Santa Claus we know and love. It was thoroughly enjoyable. I felt the genuine Christmas warmth and cheer that the characters felt at the beginning of the film, and I felt the terror that they felt when they thought they were going to be eaten by the creature that was in front of them. It follows two children as they sneak downstairs to try and catch a glimpse of Santa, but discover an eldritch horror in their living room instead. It's not all awful though, as the horror regurgitates gifts for the nice children of the land, those two included. I'm going to give this short a 2 in the love department, as the sibling dynamics are really well put through, but they're just not explored in a way that I come away with anything other than, wow, cute siblings. I'm going to give Death a 4, as it shows in the final line of dialogue in this film just how scared these children were of actually dying in that moment, and just what they thought was going to happen to them. Plus also it's heavily implied that this creature does kill the children who are on the naughty list. Sadly though, in the robots department, I'm going to give this one a 0. There was no sci-fi element. The creature that was depicted in this film felt more like on the fantasy end, something that's arguably the opposite of sci-fi. This could have very easily been a 5 as well if they had made the creature a mechanical terror instead of a fleshy one. That would have fit more in line with the themes and ideals of Love, Death, Robots, and all you'd have to change is the character design. You could have the exact same story, but it would just fit into a sci-fi anthology series better than having a fantasy creature in there would. As for my subjective rating, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I loved this short so much. It was so well done. It was beautiful to watch, and the creature was absolutely horrifying. And I could feel the palpable tension in the air and the way that those children were feeling in that moment. It was really well executed, but once again, it just didn't really fit into the series of the film, which is why it only is coming away with a 10 out of 20 instead of the 15 out of 20 it could have easily had if the creature was mechanical instead of fleshy and fantasy-like. The next short, Life Hutch, was just boring in my opinion. It follows an astronaut who crash lands on a planet. He manages to make his way to a field shelter, but his attempts to call for help are shut down by a malfunctioning maintenance machine. Say that 10 times fast. The short gets a 0 in the love department, as love isn't touched upon whatsoever, and I feel like it's even less so than in the other shorts that barely depict it. It gets a 3 in the death department, as death is threatened for the main character, and a 5 in the robots department because the thing that's causing this threat is robots. As for my subjective rating, I'm giving it a 2. It was well done in many aspects, and I honestly couldn't tell if it was animated or filmed with real people in front of the camera, but I found the short pretty much boring. It had the same premise of automated customer service, of being trapped in a small space with a malfunctioning maintenance machine who's trying to kill you, but it was just more poorly executed because it didn't have the comedy as the saving grace that the first film did. Now this film does fit well into the Love, Death, Robots anthology, but it was just boring, and I feel like it didn't really fall into my alley. It just wasn't for me. The main thing I didn't like about it was the strobing effect that the robot that was trying to kill him had. I'm someone who has photosensitivity issues with flashing lights on screen, and I couldn't watch more than half of this film, making it hard for me to enjoy whatsoever. The flashing lights weren't even necessary. They were done as when the robot's scanning things, it's light flashes, but they could have just not had it flash, and it would have been much more accessible to a wider range of audiences, myself included. The last short in this season is called The Drowned Giant, and it's about a giant who washes up on shore and the relationship a scientist forms with his corpse. Now this film is going to get a 2 in the love department, as the scientist is shown to love this corpse in his own weird way and forms this kind of bond and relationship with the corpse. It gets a 5 in the death department, as we are shown a really apathetic view of what death is like, and how the general public will try to capitalize as best as they can on the death and misfortune of others. We see that through the way they graffiti and tear apart this giant's corpse, for no real reason other than just because they can, or they can profit off it. The robots aspect of this film is only going to get a 1. A giant washing up to shore and a scientist trying to figure out where it came from is a really interesting concept for a film. There are so many possibilities you could go through, but the film doesn't explore any of them. In fact, the main issue with this film is how unscientific the scientist is. He has so many chances to take tissue test samples to try and figure out how close the giant actually is to human DNA. He could dissect into his stomach, try and figure out what the giant ate, see if there are plants or animals local to a certain part of the world and try and figure out where it came from. He can even look at the weather patterns for the day that he knows the giant washed up to try and figure out where he came from, but he does none of this. But you know what he did do? He let his colleague, another scientist, climb aboard this washed up miracle of science and crazy, probably very important scientific discovery, and encourage others to do the same. The way I would have fixed this is to make your character anything but a scientist. The way he poetically monologues to the audience throughout the film, you should have made him a poet, or a writer, or literally anything but a scientist, because his actions aren't justified. You don't, he's the least scientific character I've probably ever seen in a film, especially one where he's supposed to be a scientist. Because of all those reasons, I'm going to give my ranking of it a 1. Like I said earlier, I love the premise of this film, but it was just so poorly executed, and nothing came from it other than, wow, look, they tore apart his body, when they could have spent so much time figuring out where he came from and actually being scientific about it if you're going to introduce a scientist as your main character. It was just misused. The concept was just wasted potential. Overall, this film scores a 9 out of 10, which isn't that bad of a rating, but I admit the one thing that's carrying up it is the rank of death. The death is so well depicted in this film, and the way that humans are just tearing apart this once living thing for their own enjoyment is such a disheartening thing to see, but it also feels all too realistic. So now that all the shorts have been covered, let's break down how they compare to one another and to Season 1. So the average rank for Season 1 was 14 out of 20, and the average rank for this season was 12 out of 20. Speaking of the rankings, I'm going to put a link to the spreadsheet that I used to tally up all my rankings in the description below. You can go check that out if that interests you, and you can also see how I broke down each episode of Season 1. The average score in the love department was a 2 out of 5, down from Season 1's 3 out of 5. The average score in the death department was a 4 out of 5, the same as Season 1's 4 out of 5. The average score for robots was the same as Season 1 as well, being a 3 out of 5. Now my subjective ranking is a 3 out of 5, down from the 4 out of 5 it was in Season 1. So now ranking the episodes of Season 2 based on their scores puts them in this order, and the ones that have the same score I'm just going to do alphabetically. And ranking them based on my subjective rankings only puts them in this order. So that frees them from the constraints of the Love, Death, Robots format and just based on the quality of the short film in and of itself. So now, where did Season 2 go wrong in compared to Season 1? Well, to put it simply, there wasn't enough data. Season 2 didn't have enough chances to hit the high numbers that Season 1 did. It had less than half the amount of episodes, so we have less than half the data. With an anthology series, the less episodes you have, the less chances you are to resonate with more people. So now Love, Death, and Robots are 3 themes that are going to be unanimous across the board for all the films depicted in this series. But everything else talked about is going to be different from episode to episode, unlike in a regular series where all the same characters and topics and themes are going to be followed. This makes each episode resonate with a different crowd of people as different things are being discussed. Unlike with the TV series, where the same people who like episode 1 are going to like episode 2, you have people who aren't necessarily going to like different episodes because they're different characters, different plots, and different themes that aren't related other than the core time thing of Love, Death, Robots. So this season had a lot less chances to resonate with me as an individual than the first season did. If I took a random selection of 8 episodes from Season 1, I could give them a score over 17 or below 11. The score really is just dependent on which 8 episodes I take. In an anthology series like Love, Death, Robots, nothing but the 3 themes of love, death, and robots have to be in common between the films. So there's a lot more areas for the films to diverge from each other, and a lot more areas for them to appeal to one demographic versus another. So overall, you get more people who the show is accessible to, but they'll only like half of the episodes. So what I'm trying to say is that the main thing Netflix got wrong with this season is just not having enough episodes. They delivered 18 the first time, and this time they only did 8. Maybe they thought if they put more effort into fewer episodes, they'd have a higher quality overall, but in my experience, it's not really how an anthology works, since you're trying to appeal to a wider range of audience than you can with a single film. So the less films you have in your anthology series, even if they're all better, don't appeal to the same amount of people that more films would. One thing that I find really interesting that I feel proves this point is that the episodes scored almost identically between the Love, Death, and Robots category. It's only my subjective opinions changed, and that's because I had less chances to be impressed. Well, what are your thoughts on Love, Death, Robots Season 2? How do you think it compares to Season 1? Which episodes were your favorite in Season 2? What about in Season 1? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please try and like, comment, and subscribe. I'm trying to have a video come out every Monday. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. God, I'm stuttering like a motherfucker.